Oh, my colleague Canny Maphanga has been watching this case closely, and she joins me in studio just to give us an overview of what's taken place. So the judge speaking there, giving the points around their decision, just elaborate further on essentially what the court was saying.
So essentially, the Gauteng High Court, or good afternoon, Nompu, and to your viewers at home. Essentially, what the Gauteng High Court is stating is that it's basically affirming some of the contentions that the president made and arguing that the case was urgent and that he needed this interdict in order to deal with the summons in Part B. So essentially, what the president's main contention was that if he had to appear on the 19th, which is on Thursday, then you'd have to go before a criminal court and hold before that court on summons that were obtained in certificates that don't even have his name on it, according to his legal team. You've heard from the NPA that they've said that when they issued out those certificates to the former president, that there was no mention of the president when they did that, and the summons were served the day before. So he's essentially arguing that if he were to go to court, he would have suffered irreparable harm because he's there on a flawed process. And should he get to Part B and actually be successful in Part B, then he would have appeared in a criminal dock over some charges that were not essentially constitutionally valid at the time that he appeared.
Some people at home are shaking their heads. She's talking about this Part B. Tell us about Part B.
Well, okay, so where we start is there are these health records that we know of that were allegedly leaked by a senior prosecutor in the National Prosecuting Authority, and they were leaked to a journalist, and then the president formed three categories. That was an alleged accomplice, alleged perpetrator, and an accessory after the fact. So with respect to the president, former President Jacob Zuma is accusing him of failing to intervene in the alleged conduct of Advocate Billy Downer because it would have negatively impacted the National Prosecuting Authority and by extension the criminal justice system. So as a head of state, he would have had the powers to set up a commission of inquiry or investigation into that alleged conduct to protect that risk of that institution and the criminal justice system as a whole. The president opted to rather write to the Minister of Justice to then refer the matter to the LPC, and this could be attributed to a number of reasons, including the fact that in the past we've seen the NPA be affected by political interference, so they didn't want that to take place. This was not satisfactory for the former president, so then he launched this private prosecution bid. So there's that first nulli prosequi certificate that was in the name of Advocate Billy Downer. Then there was that second one, which had that phrase that almost broadened the scope with respect to whose name was in the docket. The former president's legal team is saying that President Cyril Ramaphosa was mentioned in the docket, but the NPA is saying that when those certificates were issued, there was no mention at all of the former or the current president, rather.
So is the private prosecution bid by former President Jacob Zuma, is that now like over, a done deal? Because of course, when we rewind back to when he actually launched that bid, it was just before the ANC was having its meeting, and some people felt it was a strategy to ensure that President Ramaphosa would have to be asked to step aside because there was a charge that was leveled against him.
Well, it's not over just yet. Remember, right now we're dealing with Part A of the application due to the period that the president had, and he would still need to set aside or launch an application to set aside those summons, and that would take longer than the actual period leading up to the 19th. So had he not received this interim interdict, he would have had to appear before the criminal court on the 19th as that document was legally binding. So what this interdict allows him, it gives him that relief and that space to then go challenge these summons that he says were obtained in a manner that was not constitutionally valid. He can then go to the court and demonstrate how those summons were obtained, and that the certificates that were issued by the NPA, which the NPA has echoed similar sentiments, were not with respect to him, but rather with respect to the senior prosecutor and the journalist in question.
And then lastly, around the issue of the substantive issue around Advocate Billy Downer, Karen Moore, and so on and so forth, isn't there also currently a debate about whether indeed he did leak that information to her? Because according to her, she argues that was information that was in the public domain anyway.
Well, I think these are separate issues. The matter you are speaking of is currently being ventilated in the Pietermaritzburg High Court. They've already made that first appearance. With respect to the president, they're saying he's an accessory after the fact. So not with respect to the leaking of the document, but rather with failing to act after the alleged leak. As a head of state, he had the powers to institute a commission of inquiry or an investigation of sorts.
Based on the allegation, not on the fact.
Based on the allegation, as we speak now, that will still be ventilated in court. But what former President Jacob Zuma wanted President Ramaphosa to do was to use his powers as head of state to investigate the matter, set up a commission. We already know that the head of state enjoys those type of powers. The head of state chose to deal with it in a manner where he referred it to the Minister of Justice, to refer it to the OPC. That was not satisfactory, and that is why that private prosecution bid was launched. So it's three separate issues. You're dealing with an accomplice, you're dealing with an alleged perpetrator, and the president is a bit different because they're alleging he's an accessory after the fact, so after the alleged offense or crime took place.
Okay, Canny. It is quite a complicated story, but thank you so much for coming to studio and telling us what it's all about. My colleague there, Canny Maphanga.